This is Up Front of the Voice of America. I'm Jackson Funganyi. The 2023 AFCON tournament is finally over. Host nation Côte d'Ivoire lifted the much-coveted trophy after defeating Nigeria's Super Eagles 2-1 in a thrilling finals match at the Alassane Ouattara Stadium in Abidjan. The Elephants had been almost counted out of the tournament after their stunning loss to Equatorial Guinea in the group stages. That victory has been described as a fairy tale comeback. According to CAF President Patrice Motsepe, about 2 billion people watched the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations. My colleagues Muqbil, Yabarow and Mike Hove covered the tournament and joined me to look back at some of the highlights of what some have said was the most exciting AFCON ever. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Now, listen, y'all were in the front row, especially for him, he was in Abidjan, but you covered this extensively. Would you say this was one of the most exciting AFCON you've watched in a long time?
For sure, I'd say at least about a decade back, this is probably one of the more exciting AFCONs. I think the storylines, the continual storylines that were in the entirety of the tournament really made it that much better. And for me, like I said, being on the ground and seeing it firsthand was like, it was amazing. I think AFCON really was a very, very well put together tournament. I had a blast, man. And
what a time to be in Abidjan.
It did not disappoint, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was your first time in Abidjan.
First time
and
in West
Africa,
Africa, man.
in West
so
Africa.
I was like, man, this was a great opportunity to, you know, see the culture, the cuisine, the people. Like I said, Ivorians are some of the most hospitable people. And to see the joy on their faces as their team continued to, you know, showcase, you know, they had a little bit of struggles in the group stages, but nonetheless, man, they made it through.
It's
and
such a great
what
comeback
a
story, Mike.
Yeah. It has to be one of the best comeback stories in African football history of all time.
Yeah.
They were almost out. Was going to be very extremely embarrassing for the Ivorians. They were pre-tournament favorites, but to see them come back and go all the way and win it.
You cannot write this in a script.
You couldn't have written this any better, man. This had to be one of the best African football stories of all time.
Absolutely. What was the energy like in Abidjan?
It was exciting, bro. You can't even really measure it, man, because there was this one song that we keep talking about. It was the quote-unquote unofficial song by Tam Sir, Coupe de Marteau. Bro, when I tell you, when that song comes on, you could be driving in traffic, you hear the song, you look over, the drivers are dancing, you go to like a restaurant and like the DJs will just be playing it, or it'll just be playing anywhere. It's a ridiculously infectious type of song, and it was playing throughout the entirety of the city. I believe also he performed it at the finals. Maybe I think it was like halftime. So after the first half was over, he performed it with some of these dancers that they dance. They're like a social media guys. So yeah, man, that song went viral, and it's probably one of his first songs that have really taken off like that. So shout out to Tam Sir for that too.
I mean, speaking of social media, this was also like one of the, I guess, the most covered on social media tournaments that we've had in a long time.
Not just social media, everywhere.
Yeah.
This AFCON is definitely historic. It had, like you said, 2 billion eyes on it. That's something that has not happened in a very long time.
Yeah.
Typically, AFCON has been the tournament that a lot of people just go, they're going back to Africa to play football. But to see a lot of people, have the pride to want to go back to it. All the superstars were super excited to go back to their countries to represent. This is something that has not happened in a very, very long time. This AFCON had every box fixed.
All right, so going into the games, so before the start of the tournament, which were your predictions? How true did they come?
To be honest with you, bro, if this was anything similar to like March Madness brackets, that was bracket buster. It was a wrap, bro. Forget about it. Nothing you expected, because look at all the major teams, the bigger countries, the quote-unquote giants of football, right? The Egypts, the Ghanas, the Senegals, the Moroccos, Algerias, Tunisias. Like, I think like top, the North African countries that were in there were like top 6 of the countries, and only Morocco made it through to the knockout. So it really showed you Senegal dominated, bro, in the group stages, and then they faced Les Elephants. They played Les Elephants that had nothing to lose, and then they lost. So I think this tournament really showed us the beauty of the game, man. All it is just 90 minutes plus extra time. Some games went to PKs, but nonetheless, you know,
many goals scored.
Too many goals scored, and also we've seen the quality, Jackson. Right, the quality of the play in African football has risen throughout the years. Prior to, the conversations would be like exactly as Mike mentioned. This is just some of our players from the European leagues are going to go play in this African tournament. They'll be back. No one's watching it.
Yeah.
Everybody was super excited to watch it, to find a way to watch it. One of the things I think, to me, that was super important for the next AFCON will be, how can we get more people accessibility to watch the game, right?
Absolutely.
You would, because your normal stations are not carrying it. So this is something else for, some of our bigger American stations to potentially think about in the next.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we talked about the comeback, the great comeback story. Obviously, the champions, les éléphants, the elephants. What is the underdog story? What are the teams that surprised you?
Oh man, a lot. Cape Verde, definitely up there. Mauritania, definitely up there. Angola. They are technically on the continent are a heavy puncher, but in comparison to the teams that we expected to get there, Angola definitely blew out the water. I think those would be the standouts. And then, of course, I'll put Bafana for the sake of it. Merely because as much as South Africa has always been a Southern African giant, when you're looking at the continent, it's been a very, very, very long time.
It has been on the decline
It's been
for a
on
long
the
time.
decline for a long time, to the point where even when AFCON started, a lot of South Africans were like,
Absolutely.
Right.
And then they started seeing the changes. And even then, people were still like, By the time they were playing Nigeria, funny story, I had a lot of South Africans that would do this. They would be like, listen, my heart is with Bafana, but my money is with the Super Eagles. You know what I mean?
But the funny thing is that I spoke to a couple of Nigerians who also said the same thing about the Super Eagles. They didn't think, they say, it used to be a solid program, but now it has kind of been on decline.
But I don't even think it's on decline. I mean, true, to the point of the Super Eagles, they haven't been playing well recently. Up until AFCON, they had been drawing here with teams way smaller where you're like, why are you drawing to this? However, what I will say is it also speaks to how the standards of football on the continent have grown. So I don't think it's that the standards in Nigeria, Ghana, and all that have dropped. Granted, they all had their own problems, but I think it also shows that Cape Verde, for example, the standards of football have risen. In Angola, for example, the standards of football have risen. It just so happened that some of these teams walked into the tournament thinking that without putting in your A game, you can walk through it, and it just so happened
didn't
to be a
pan out.
different story.
I also think another thing is, we tend to look at African football from the star perspective only, right? We think Nigeria has Osimhen by himself. He's going to be able to do much. I mean, he played a relatively well tournament in that he was just kind of like a disruptor, right? He wasn't really banging much goals, but because of what he brings, like
star power.
Yeah, and the stuff you as a defender or a tactical manager have to shift towards him, right? So from that perspective, I get it. But I think the game has moved from the perspective of just watching,
the one guy,
like the one or two players can lead an entire team. Now I think it's more chemistry based, right? The Bafanas, the thing I loved about that team is that team, majority of them played together in the South African League, right? I think the entire team was comprised mainly of just two teams, right?
Like local teams.
Predominantly two, right?
Predominantly was Mamelodi Sundowns and
Orlando
Pirates.
Absolutely. So that goes to show you that maybe chemistry is more important than star power, because if you have star power, you got these big name stars, but they're playing with some of their teammates that don't necessarily gel with them, or maybe are not even necessarily on the same level as them, right? You as Osimhen are expecting the ball to be here on your foot every cross, but unfortunately maybe your wingers can't get you the ball because maybe they don't play on that level. So that becomes problematic. So I think the development of the game, as Mike mentioned, is getting there for the other countries, but more importantly, the other countries are deciding, maybe if we don't have this superstar talent, let's play together more so than just 2 weeks right before a tournament, and we'll have that chemistry and we'll gel more together.
We've seen that in the Basketball Africa League, no?
Angola, Petro de Luanda, we've seen them. The same team been playing together for a decade.
So Ivory Coast invested $1 billion in this, building the infrastructure. Do you think they get their money back?
I absolutely think they do. I think what they showed in hosting this tournament just showcased, man, how important the game is for them. If we just think historically, right? what football means to them, the time of Didier Drogba, and how they were civil unrest in the country and football unified the country together. So this is not just a game for them. This is something more than that, and it really showed how important it is for the regular person that maybe can't even necessarily afford to go to the games. They were supporting by watching, going to these fan
watch parties,
or watch party or something, or just even at a specific. We went to certain places in urban districts where they would just have the TV on, watching the games, you know, while still working. So it's a beautiful thing what it meant for Ivory Coast to win.
I heard earlier that there was issues getting into the stadium. Was that something that you witnessed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to me, CAF definitely had the right idea in trying to make a seamless process, right? They wanted the challenges that happened in Cameroon and Egypt, where people were just lining up in front of the stadiums, making these long, massive lines, make it difficult for them. So what they did was they moved that out the way. You cannot, or you could not purchase at the stadium. But what that did was it flooded the servers on the website, and then
they crashed.
They crashed to some of the sites. Maybe, I don't know necessarily if they crashed or not, but the tickets were unavailable a lot of times for a lot of people. So
even though the stadium was empty,
there we go.
Empty sometimes.
There we go.
In the beginning.
So there was that problem. To me, that was the biggest issue that they had in this specific tournament. I even had an instance where I was right in front of the Stade Felix stadium, where I was doing a live hit for Africa 54, and some fans that were actually going to watch the Ghana and Egypt game drove from Ghana, from Accra, saying that they could not find tickets anywhere, and they were trying to buy tickets at the stadium, and unfortunately they were unable to, and they were very, you know, not necessarily very happy, you know.
Of course, I mean, you drove that far.
Absolutely. So those type of problems, you know, could have been fixed, and it just looks better because there was a ton of people that wanted to be in the stadiums, you know.
I mean, also visually, you want more people inside the stadium.
And there were people that wanted to be in there. Unfortunately, there were just some challenges that they had to overcome.
So, Mike, on the finals, the AFCON finals, you know, took place on the same day as the Super Bowl. Which one were you more excited about?
Listen, I was torn in two. Obviously, I'm going to be frank with you, but you know, watching the finals for AFCON was that's prime.
That was a crowning moment for you here already.
That's something, and for different reasons. Number one, I grew up watching AFCON, so it's always been a revered thing for me. And secondly, once again, it traces back to when I was watching it from the jump of this tournament, how this story just kept unpacking and unpacking and unpacking, and
it's surprising.
I had to watch that final just to really be like, wait, is Ivory Coast really going to do this?
Right.
It's awesome. Like, what exactly does this mean? Because there were so many repercussions and implications to whoever wins this AFCON. So for me, I'll say AFCON takes it. Obviously, I was excited to watch the Super Bowl, but AFCON.
So what does this mean in terms of ranking for the African countries, for Ivory Coast that won the
Yeah, Ivory Coast, I mean, from the recent new rankings that we were just looking at, they just rose 10 slots. So they went from 49th position in the world to 39. A bunch of other countries went down in numbers as well. I believe Morocco now is the 12th in the world.
They went up.
Yeah, so all in all, I think for the most part, a lot of countries, they gained from this. You know, if you had a decent AFCON run, your numbers went up. You know, I'm sure Equatorial Guinea, their numbers had to have gone up after the performance.
Absolutely.
Similarly with Cape Verde. So some of the bigger storylines, or not so big initially, but to me, after the fact, they became bigger lines because you didn't expect it from them. I'm sure they'll get rewarded with the FIFA rankings.
Gentlemen, before we end, I want to give a plug and a shout out to Kick It AFCON, your podcast that you guys were hosting each week during the tournament. Some of the best content on soccer right now. VOAAfrica.com. Go check it out.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you guys for coming through. I look forward to having you again, and maybe
watching
Mo
Yeah.
Kick It.
AFCON.
Absolutely.
Salute.